January 1941. Before sunrise. A frozen valley in Austria. Snow rests on bare rock, the air is sharp, breath turns white and disappears. High stone walls rise out of the ground. They are not meant to keep warmth in. They are meant to keep people from leaving. This is Mauthausen. Inside the camp, men stand in thin uniforms. Some are prisoners of war. Some are political prisoners. Some are marked as enemies without a country. Their faces are hollow. Their boots are worn through. Guards watch from above, silent, armed, unmoved. This place is not supposed to exist like this. On paper, rules protect prisoners of war. On paper, there are inspections, food rations, medical care. But here, paper means nothing. Men are worked until they collapse. Those who fall are not helped. They are removed. Names disappear from lists. Bodies disappear into smoke or pits. Even German officers will later admit something is wrong here. Not cruel, not harsh. Illegal. This camp does not bend the rules of war. It erases them completely. And to understand how that became possible, we must first look at the world that allowed it to happen. Before the war spread across Europe, there were rules. Clear rules, written rules. The Geneva Convention of 1929 was meant to protect prisoners of war. It said captured soldiers must be fed, housed, and treated humanely. They could be forced to work, but not on dangerous jobs. They had the right to medical care. They had the right to Red Cross visits. They had the right to live. Most countries in Europe accepted these rules. Germany did too, on paper. When World War II began in September 1939, millions of soldiers were captured on all sides. Prison camps were quickly built across Germany and occupied territories. Many of these camps were run by the German army, the Wehrmacht. In these camps, rules were often harsh but still followed to some degree. Records were kept. Prisoners were counted. Death was not the goal. But alongside the army system, another system was growing. This system was run by the SS. The SS answered not to military law but directly to Adolf Hitler and Heinrich Himmler. They believed some people did not deserve protection, not as soldiers, not as humans, political enemies, Jews, Soviet POWs, resistance fighters, prisoners labeled as dangerous or undesirable. To the SS, the Geneva Convention did not apply to these people. This created a split inside Nazi Germany. One system followed rules, even in war. The other rejected rules entirely. By 1938, before the war even began, the SS had already built camps designed for punishment, not detention. These camps were placed under a different authority, different paperwork, different language. Prisoners were not called POWs, they were called inmates. Once that change happened, everything else followed. Food became a tool. Labor became a weapon. Death became routine. And it is within this shadow system that one camp would be given a special role, one that made it stand apart even from other camps. That camp was Mauthausen. And to understand why it became so deadly, we must continue deeper into how and why it was created. Mauthausen was established in August 1938, months before World War II began. It stood near the Danube River in annexed Austria. The location was not chosen by chance. Beneath the hills lay granite quarries, heavy stone, valuable stone, stone that required hard labor to extract. The SS saw profit, punishment, and power in the same place. From the beginning, Mauthausen was classified differently. It was labeled a Category III camp, the harshest level in the Nazi camp system. Prisoners sent here were considered incorrigible, people the regime did not expect to survive. This classification mattered. It meant guards were instructed not to preserve life. It meant exhaustion was acceptable. It meant death was not an accident, it was expected. As the war expanded, Mauthausen's population changed. Political prisoners from across Europe arrived first, then resistance fighters, then Jews, then prisoners of war, including Spanish Republicans, Soviet soldiers, and later Allied POWs placed outside normal protections. Many of these men should have been protected by international law. They were not. The camp expanded into a complex. Gusen II and III followed. Underground factories were carved into the mountains. Prisoners worked inside them for arms production, aircraft parts, ammunition. Work continued day and night. Food rations fell as workloads increased. Medical care existed mostly on paper. Prisoners too weak to work were marked and removed. Executions were carried out quietly, sometimes publicly. One place inside the camp became infamous, the Stairs of Death. 186 stone steps climbed from the quarry to the camp above. Prisoners carried heavy granite blocks up those steps. Those who fell were beaten, or pushed, or crushed by those behind them. Even some German soldiers stationed nearby noticed something was wrong. This was not a prison camp. This was not labor. This was destruction. By 1944, Mauthausen had one of the highest death rates of any camp in the Nazi system. And yet, it continued to operate, protected by secrecy, paperwork, and fear. By 1944, the war had turned against Germany. The Allies were advancing from the west. The Red Army was pushing from the east. German industry was under constant bombing. Inside Mauthausen, pressure increased. Prisoner numbers rose sharply. Transports arrived from evacuated camps across Europe. Men already starving were forced into the same barracks. Food supplies did not increase. Work demands did. The SS response was simple: work harder, feed less. Daily labor stretched to exhaustion. Prisoners were sent into underground tunnels to build aircraft factories safe from Allied bombs. Air inside was thick. Light was poor. Accidents were constant. Injuries were ignored. Those who could not work were classified as useless. That classification was often a death sentence. Executions increased, some by shooting, some by hanging, others by lethal injection. Records were altered. Causes of death were falsified: typhus, heart failure, exhaustion, anything but murder. By this stage, even German military officers passing through the area began to raise concerns. These prisoners were not being treated as POWs. Some were Allied soldiers. Some wore uniforms when captured. Yet they were denied Red Cross access, denied identification, denied survival. This was no longer a gray area of wartime cruelty. It was a complete rejection of international law. In late 1944 and early 1945, death rates spiked dramatically. Thousands died in months. The camp command knew Germany was losing the war. Evidence became a threat. Orders came down to accelerate production and reduce witnesses. And as the front lines moved closer, the final phase of Mauthausen began. A phase defined not by control, but by desperation. By April 1945, the war was nearly over. American forces were crossing into Austria. The sound of artillery could be heard in the distance. Inside Mauthausen, the SS understood what defeat would mean. Evidence mattered now. Witnesses mattered. Food deliveries stopped almost entirely. Prisoners were left to starve. Some collapsed where they stood. Others died in their bunks, too weak to move. Executions did not stop. They became quieter. Prisoners from other camps were pushed into Mauthausen in death marches. Men arrived already broken. Many died within days. Barracks meant for a few hundred now held thousands. Disease spread rapidly. The SS destroyed records. Files were burned. Orders were given orally. Guards avoided signatures. Responsibility was being erased. Some prisoners were forced into the quarries until the final days. Others were locked inside tunnels with no food. There were plans to seal entrances and let everyone inside die. In some locations, explosives were prepared but never used. Then on May 5, 1945, American forces reached the camp. What they found shocked even seasoned soldiers. Thousands of corpses lay unburied. Survivors weighed barely more than children. Some prisoners could not stand. Others stared without reaction. They had lived too long in a place without rules. American officers quickly realized something important. This was not just a brutal camp. This was a camp that operated outside the law of war entirely. Reports would later state that Mauthausen was designed for annihilation through labor, not detention, not punishment, annihilation. But liberation was only the beginning. What came next would determine whether such a place could ever exist again. In the days after May 5, 1945, the full scale of Mauthausen became clear. American medical teams moved in quickly. They were unprepared for what they found. Starvation was everywhere. Disease spread freely. Many prisoners died after liberation, their bodies already too damaged to recover. Investigators began documenting the camp. They counted the dead. They photographed the barracks. They walked the quarries. They read what little paperwork remained. Estimates later showed that more than 90,000 people died in the Mauthausen camp system. Some historians place the number higher. Many victims were never recorded at all. What shocked investigators most was not just the death toll. It was the structure. Mauthausen was not chaotic. It was organized. Its brutality followed policy. During post-war trials, this mattered. At Nuremberg and later SS trials, Mauthausen was repeatedly cited as an example of a camp that violated the Geneva Convention in full. Prisoners of war were deliberately stripped of legal status. Allied soldiers were treated as disposable labor. Red Cross access was denied by design. Even former German officers testified that Mauthausen crossed a line. Not just morally, legally. Camp commanders and guards were prosecuted. Some were executed. Others received long sentences. But many perpetrators escaped justice, blending back into post-war society. The camp itself was preserved, not rebuilt, not erased. Left standing as evidence. Stone steps still climb from the quarry. Barracks still stand in silence. The air feels heavy, even now. Mauthausen proved something dangerous. That laws only matter when people choose to obey them. And that realization leads to the final question. What this camp means, not just for history but for humanity itself. Mauthausen was not the largest camp of the war. It was not the most famous. But it was one of the clearest examples of what happens when rules are removed on purpose. This camp showed that cruelty does not need chaos. It can be planned. It can be written into policy. It can be defended with paperwork and silence. The men who died here were not killed in battle. They were killed slowly, through labor, hunger, and neglect. Many were soldiers who should have been protected by law. Others were civilians caught inside a system that decided their lives had no value. After the war, the phrase illegal camp mattered. It meant something had gone beyond wartime brutality. It meant responsibility could not be avoided. Mauthausen became proof that even in total war, there are lines that must not be crossed. Today, the camp still stands. Not as a warning shouted loudly, but as a warning spoken quietly. Stone by stone, step by step. It reminds us that laws are fragile, that systems matter, and that when rules disappear, humanity often follows. The silence at Mauthausen is not empty. It is full of memory, and it asks only one thing of the future: that this kind of place is never allowed to exist again.